Hello and welcome. Today I want to give you a look in behind the scenes at one of my favorite seasons on the farm, and that is my Christmas wreath month. Of course, the focus tends to be on all of these glorious wreaths that we're sending out and that we're hanging up on our doors. But what does it actually look like on a flower farm like mine, where I'm trying to grow as much or all of what is going out in my flower products? What does it look like as we prepare for this busy season? So this is a full month for me. I set customer pickup options for 4 weeks, starting in early November and running through to early December. For me, with my wreaths, it starts with gathering all of my ingredients and prepping my wreath frames. Some of that is already done months ago, namely my dried flowers, which are coming off of my flower field in the summer and getting hung up while the weather is still warm and dry. And then for fresh ingredients, the first thing that I'm usually going out and grabbing is the moss. So I'm using fresh moss that I harvest off of my own woods and off of my own property. I love how moss regenerates, and I really love how I have a connection to where the moss is coming from, and I can make sure that it's being harvested in a sustainable way. It's also, for me, available in ample supply because I live in a rainforest type ecosystem. And it is mild and it is cool and rainy here a lot of the year, so we have a lot of moss. So this is what works for me, and it is what I've built my floristry and my wreaths off of, but it really depends on your location and what materials are available to you. For us here on the west coast of British Columbia, we have a lot of moss, as I mentioned. In other parts of the world, they actually will tend to be using other types of frames, like a willow frame, like straw frames. So it really kind of depends a little bit too on just where you are, what farming is going on in your area, and what your local ecosystem is like. So the great thing about moss is it is pretty much indestructible. It can be used from dry, it can be stored basically forever. It can be re-wetted once it's dry. So I gather my moss quite a bit ahead of time so that I can start mossing up my frames. And then my frames can be stored. I usually will make sure they're damp and store them in plastic bags, or they could be stored in tubs as well, whatever really works. Then I get to gather and process all of the fresh evergreen materials. Most of these come off of my property. We have a good variety of different kinds of spruces, from green to blue. We also have Douglas fir. As long as I have a cool place to store them, I can gather and process and store them away. As long as they're moist and in plastic or in tubs, they can hold for a very long time. So once this is all gathered up, then I will get it all cut down into small, useful pieces. This year, I was able to employ my kids to help with that. So it only took us a couple of hours to fill a whole bunch of great big garbage cans full of different types of greenery. I find that a really handy way to store them. And then I can just grab what I need and set piles of it on my table for when I'm actually making the wreaths. And aside from evergreens, I'm also foraging other materials. I love to keep an eye on what's going on naturally around me with seed heads and foliages that are drying or turning different colors. And I'm always trying new things, but one of my favorite ones that I use every year is bracken fern. This time of year, it starts to naturally dry and it turns a beautiful golden color while also keeping its shape. And it's absolutely beautiful in wreaths, not only bringing a different color, but just bringing that ferny texture and shape to the wreaths. So that's one hand. And then the other component of wreath sales for me is getting my website set up and getting a newsletter written. So I want to get my shop all updated with having my Christmas pre-order, my Christmas wreath pre-order front and center on my shop page. It's a great time to just look at my product pages as well and make sure that I have updated photos. I'm always taking photos of new things that are going out every year. So it's nice to go through and just make sure I have a good selection of photos that show examples of my work, examples of what they can expect to receive. And the newsletter, it's also helpful. It goes out to my customer base and lets them know that my website is now open and that they can pre-order their Christmas wreath. So without the newsletter, I wouldn't get nearly as many sales because social media is just not that reliable for getting the word out to those people who are actually really interested in wanting to purchase the wreath. And that leads me into how I've structured my business. So one of the most important things that I do with my business is that I operate on a pre-order basis almost exclusively. I'm only making the wreaths that I have already sold. This has just been really an important model for me for running my business, and it really helps since I'm also a mom and I've got kids. I can't really afford to be wasting my time. I'm also farming. If anyone else out there is farming for your own flowers, you know how much work it is. So this has been a really important part of how I've structured my business, just to protect my time and not be sitting on inventory that I'm stuck with. It is an order pickup day today for my customers. That is something that took me a little while to figure out how to handle the time commitment that it actually takes to meet up with each and every customer. And it's a reason why I slowly have raised my minimum purchase price for order pickups. And I don't tend to deal with small items anymore because of the time it takes for me to actually meet with someone. Time that is really hard for me to factor into my price point and still remain competitive. I offer set pickup dates. So in this case for Christmas, I'm offering 4 options for 4 Saturdays. Between the hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., my customers can come, they can show up within that time frame. This at least allows me to sort of get everybody here on a specific day and sort of boost my efficiency that way. It's still a little bit tricky though, and I'm still trying to be available. I have to be around for my customers for whenever they do come. So I'm hanging out here in my kitchen. I am processing eggs right now. That is something that I can do that is work related while I'm waiting for my customers to show up. I'm gonna take you guys downstairs though and just show you some of the wreaths that are waiting still to be picked up and what my pickup area looks like, because it's very not fancy, but we make it work. So my pickup area is my front door area. This is it. It is now storage for family things, for bikes. This is where my studio used to be though, and it was very outdoors and a little bit cramped, but when I first started, this space was awesome. And I ran the flowers out of here for a few years. So this works. I'm a big proponent of starting with what you have. It doesn't need to all be perfect. When you start, you don't need to have all the things. People are really amazing about coming and not having expectations for my space to look like a professional floral studio. So anyways, I've got all of the wreaths waiting here. You can see the ones that are still left and waiting to be picked up. One thing that I would love about this space to make it better for my customers is to just have a wider driveway so that I can make more of a space for them to be walking up to this area. And I just make sure to communicate with my customers when they're coming, where to go. I just am very, very overly clear when I send them a wreath pickup or an order pickup reminder about, please feel free to park on the driveway. Please walk down the driveway to my front door area. Just try to be really obvious so that people don't end up wandering all over our farm. So this works. It's not perfect, but it works, and we make the best of it. Something that I do in my web shop that I feel is important is offering a little bit of customization for my customers, but not too much customization, as I'm trying to supply a more luxury item and I want them to feel like they're getting this custom choice while also making it easy for me. They can choose whether they want a ribbon or no ribbon. Doesn't change the cost, but some people just don't want a ribbon. Most people will take it though. And then the other thing that they can do is they can put in kind of their preferred color, but I do make suggestions because I think it's hard for people to come up with that on their own. So I'll make a suggestion of, like, examples are classical red and whites or neutral tones or jewel tones, just some examples, some prompts to help them as they fill in that box. And then the other thing that they can supply me with is that they can let me know the color of the door or the wall where the wreath is going to be hanging. That allows me to step up my wreath quality even more so than I did in my earlier years, because knowing that a door is black or white actually makes a really big difference for what foliage I'm going to be picking and what color ribbon I'm going to be putting on it. So that has allowed me to just elevate the quality of what my customer is getting and make sure that it's actually going to look good where it's going. I also like to keep in mind my own needs when it comes to allowing my customers to customize things. One way that I do that is that I don't offer too many different types of wreaths that they can order, or too many different sizes or price points. So really when they go into my web shop to order, they are just getting, at the moment for the last few years, they're just getting 3 options: a skookum huge, massive, crazy wild wreath with 1 price point, and then a sort of classical style all around evergreen wreath done up how I do it in my signature look, but sort of like a nod to sort of a classical style that you could picture with pine cones and things. I only do that one in 1 size because I just don't think that it would be very easy for me to offer that one in several different price points and then try to be consistent with each different price point when I'm making them. So I just offer 1 size, and I only have to know how to make 1 type of wreath. And then the final price point to sort of, especially to slide in for some of my customers who don't have quite as big of a budget or even quite as big of a space that they want to fill, is a crescent style asymmetrical wreath. And that one, of course, can come in a little bit smaller. And so a little bit of a lower price point kind of gets me into the door of some of my customers who might not want to pay for a full, lush seasonal wreath. This is a wreath that was requested in classical colors, reds and whites, and it's going on a turquoise teal door. So I thought that I would do this taupe ribbon just to tie in with these beautiful gold colors, and also to show up really nicely against that door. Here's some of my little glass ornaments that I do. These are really beautiful. I just love these, and they make wonderful gifts. This is a wreath I do every year for one of my customers. So I try to change it up a little bit every year because they always order a neutral colored wreath. It goes on a dark colored door, but it has glass behind it. So I put in more of these dark accents. This is Rudbeckia seed heads, if you're wondering, just to help pick this wreath up and make it pop. So exciting to have a request for a jewel toned wreath this year. Very excited about this one. And I just happen to have these little pumpkins left over for Thanksgiving. So they of course went in there. And this one is going against a turquoisey teal door as well. So that's just gonna be beautiful. And here's one that's requested in reds and whites, and it's going on a white door. So in this case, I've focused on putting more red foliages in just to help make it stand against the door. And we have a red ribbon to bring color. And isn't this amazing? I love these. These are strawberry corns. I love these in the Christmas wreaths. Grew them one time and they weren't ready in time for what I grew them for, which was Thanksgiving. And I ended up using them in the Christmas wreaths, and I have never stopped. One thing that I do differently nowadays that I'm handling a lot more wreath orders is that I basically will try to pre-green my wreaths. So once I've got all my greenery cut and in storage and staying hydrated, there's no reason why I can't do the same thing with them on the frame. So for example, here I have a wreath that has been pre-greened. So I've got my pre-greened wreaths here. Some of them have already left this week, but this is just not super fancy, and I'm a little cramped in my studio right now for this. But what I do is I keep my wreaths, once they're greened up, the wreaths, I keep them misted, and then I keep them covered up in a tarp. So I've got them sitting here just on a garbage bag and covered up with some tarping to keep them moist. A lot of them are really similar. So in this one, I have gone in and I wanted some contrasting blues. So I've got lots of pine, I've got blue spruce and some blue bits of cedar, as well as the green ivy, the green cedar, and boxwoods. So this wreath is, I believe, destined for a white door, and the order is for a red and white wreath. So for a red and white wreath, I love to include some blue foliage, a little bit more emphasis on the blues. I find the red and the blue is really a nice crisp look. And then I have a couple of wreaths. These are matching for one of my very good customers who always orders two. Let me tell you, I stress out about when wreaths have to match and they're going to hang side by side. I don't charge extra, but it adds a lot more stress just trying to make sure that they look uniform in size. You can probably see that the coloring on this one is a lot more yellow compared to the bluey one. So I've stayed away from the blue foliages in these because what she's ordered is neutral colored wreaths, but for a black door. So in this case, one of the things I like on a dark door is to have light foliages. So variegated foliages that are variegated with white is really helpful. So in this case, I've got a lot of this variegated cedar. I've used some boxwoods even that are a little more into the yellow. So I'm going to get started now. These wreaths have to go out in a couple of days, so I'm going to get them all done up now with all the dried flowers that I like to add and get them decked out properly and add all the details that they right now are lacking. So the first thing that I will add if I'm adding them to a wreath is I will get all of my cones in. Pine cones, fir cones. There are several different types in here. I have Douglas fir and I have a proper pine cones here. They are a little bit slow because I wired them in. Glue can work, but glue sometimes isn't that reliable in the cold temperatures, and I'd rather they not fall off. Cones can be kind of a focal. They are going to bring some different texture and color. It's really helpful when you want a natural looking wreath to make sure you don't place them all in an even distribution around your frame where you will get sort of a fakey look. So if you want a natural look, one of the things that I love to do is group some of the cones together. Don't just put them all on their own. Group some together, space them out differently. If you're using one type of cone and they're all going to look the same, don't put them evenly apart. Put some closer, some further apart. It will really help to get a natural look. So on this frame, if you look here, if I just put one here and I put one over here, it's kind of a bit repetitive. But if I group these two together, the way things are in nature, I'm going to get a more beautiful natural look. One of my favorite things to add into my Christmas wreath is dried flowers and dried foliages. It's really helped to make up for the fact that I'm trying to both grow and produce as much for my florals as I can off of my farm, as well as avoiding the use of plastics if it's possible. So the nice thing about using the dried flowers is while they bring beautiful texture when they contrast with the fresh evergreen foliages, they also help to bring color, which takes the place of needing any kind of like glittery things or plastic ornaments or other sorts of things. This is the remainder of what I have from my dried florals, and it's a bit of a jumble now. I use a lot of statice and straw flowers. New favorite this year have been this Achillea, which is a perennial Achillea called Marshmallow, as well as Feverfew, which is a beautiful little textural element that I've been using a lot, especially in neutral colored wreaths. Just brings this beautiful golden hue to the wreaths. I also have used some gomphrena, although I sort of tend to preserve a lot of my gomphrena for my dried wreaths as well as my dried Christmas ornaments. And I always love lots of grasses and other textural materials. So this is miscanthus. It's like all I have left. I've used every last stem that I possibly could get this year. And another particular favorite is Echinops. It really contrasts beautifully into a red wreath in particular, and I also love it in a neutral wreath with golden tones. As I'm working, I like to work on two wreaths at a time when it's possible. In this case, I'm working on this matched set of wreaths, so it makes sense to build them side by side as I go. But even if I'm working on two wreaths that are going to be similar, and the end will be maybe a little bit different, but a lot of the base is the same, I like to try to work at two at a time just to speed things up. What's going in next on these is special bits of foliage. So I start out, as I said, with sort of a basis of foliage. Things usually between 3 to 5 different types of foliage is in my base. And then I want to make sure that I'm adding things that I don't have a lot of, but special little bits. This is eunomous, so it's quite lovely because it's bright and variegated, and it will help to just lift off out of this wreath and give it some interest and some extra beauty. I'm also going to add, in this case, some dried peony foliage, and it holds up quite well in sort of these damp environment that we are in. And I'm just going to be tucking some of this in, particularly further in the back, just to add a little bit of a different texture and color and just pick up a little bit of interest. This is the beauty of using a moss base, is that I'm able to just poke in most stems. As long as stems are durable enough, most of them are pretty easy to poke right into those wreaths. Now I have some grasses I'm going to start adding. One thing I've learned with the grasses and linear things is to make sure that I'm adding them at an angle, because these are wrapped wreaths. My foliages are tied on in little bundles, so they are generally going in a clockwise direction. So I don't want to then have all of my grasses sticking straight out. It looks really awkward. Let me just tell you, I've learned that one from experience. So again, I'm just poking them through the back, and what I like to do once I get through is it's easier to just reach in and then pull the stem down to where I want it to be. And then afterwards, I'll go in and cut out the long stems that are all sticking at the back so that I have a clean look for my customers. I always want the backs of my wreaths to be presentable. It's a nice perk of using moss and taking the time to put the moss on. It also creates beautiful backing, because a lot of doors have windows, and there's nothing uglier than the wired back of a wired wreath, in my opinion. Something that I do differently now than I have done for the past few years is that I'm not putting any dried materials into that pre-greened wreath, and that includes any little dainty bits. So in the past, I would have, as I was making it, been mindful of the eventual look of the wreath, and I would have put in any dried bits that I would want in there that might be fragile and harder to insert into the frame afterwards, like bunny tail grasses or things like that with really thin stems. I don't do that anymore because that makes it impossible for me to store them wet, and I really want to be able to store them away like this, mist this really well and store it away wet. So nowadays I don't do that. I just do the greenery, and I'm adding in all my dried bits later. And so for the dainty bits that I used to just add as I went to save time, now how I get those into the wreath is I will either tape them onto skewers or onto a stick in little clusters, and then they can just be inserted in that way. So on more of a stick that can actually handle being pushed into the wreath. So that's kind of a compromise on that, and it helps me be able to work with these wreaths way in advance and handle the volume of the wreaths that I'm doing. And then the final touch on any wreath is the ribbon. I have a lovely collection of ribbon. I especially love ones with the frayed edge that are silky. They catch the wind so nicely. They have a bit more of a luxe feel. I also love the grosgrain type ribbon. It has sort of a nice ribbed texture on it that adds a really nice sort of a luxe feel to the ribbon. I keep a good assortment of colors, but the main color that I really need every year is red ribbons. 50% of my wreath sales are still going out with a red ribbon. So that is the one color that I need to make sure I have lots of. For a neutral wreath, I will be a bit more informed by the color of the door or the wall where it's hanging. They will typically have a white ribbon, but if they're on a white door, I would avoid a white ribbon, and I would be going for either a gold or a taupe or even something like this lovely soft green. That is the next most popular wreath color that I do, is just a neutral with no bright colors in it. And then I keep a few really fun like turquoisey and pinky colors for if I'm doing jewel tones. Actually, this year jewel tone wreaths have been really popular this year, but sometimes I've also had runs on, for example, plum, where I'm using purpley plum colors a lot, so it's really hard to predict. So I like a little bit of a mixture so I can handle whatever else comes in. It gives me lots of room to work with. And then it's wreath pickup day. I really love wreath pickup day. It's really become a special time for me. I love seeing my customers' excited smiles and joyful, happy faces when they see their wreath and get to take it home. They're always so happy and delighted, and everyone tends to be leading up to Christmas, they just tend to be very excited and happy and grateful, and it's just really fun. And also, I've been doing this long enough, I have customers coming back for their 6th or 7th season, and so it does feel a bit like a reunion too. So many of my customers now, whether it's their 2nd or 3rd year, I get to know them, and it's really special to get to hand off their wreath to them and catch up with them. As the wreaths wind down and we get closer to Christmas, and as I mentioned, this year I shut the wreaths down. December 7th was my last day, and then I needed the couple of weeks that I have left to just do all the other things I need to do and prepare for my own personal holidays, catch up with YouTube and all of these things. I did not expect to have such this huge run on wreaths this year. This was my busiest wreath season to date, and that is one reason why you have not seen me on YouTube really at all. Did not mean to just not be here, but I also run a flower business, and this is a really important time of year for my business. So I'm really glad I can be back sharing a bit about it now with you, now that it's all done. And I'm starting to think now on next wreath season, which means I'm starting to think about like, what dried flowers do I need to grow? What do I need to replenish in my seed inventory to make sure that I have those colors for my wreaths next year? I definitely go through a ton of white dried flowers every year. So white status is a huge one for me. It's super durable in the fresh wreaths, and it holds up really well in humid conditions. And straw flowers are a huge one for me as well. They just bring that little focal point. Besides white, I also use a lot of red ones. I use a lot of salmon, creamy colors, and also really love using the plum into the burgundy kind of tones. They actually blend really prettily into red wreaths as well. Especially this year, I've used up so much, and I need to be growing all of that stuff this next growing season. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into how I do things here on my flower farm for wreath season. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and very enjoyable time making your own personal wreaths or making wreaths for others. It is one of my favorite things to make out of the cutting gardens and to forage out of the woods and even my neighbors' yards. And if you have never made a wreath before and you're wanting to try that out, I do have some inspirational wreath videos on my channel, as well as some tutorials on how I do my classical Christmas wreath that is a standard door size of about 22 to 24 inches. So I will link all of those videos into the video description for you, and I hope that helps you get started off exploring your own wreath journey. Thanks for being here, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye for now.